There's a special kind of betrayal that only family can deliver, the kind that festers because it's wrapped in years of shared history and supposed love. My name is Alina, and the source of my particular lesson in familial treachery was a 2-story duplex on the east side of town, a building I'd poured my blood, sweat, and every spare dime into for years. It wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was my declaration of independence, my nest egg, the proof that I, a perpetually scrambling to make ends meet woman, could build something solid. I bought it 5 years ago. The paint was peeling, the plumbing was questionable, and the garden looked like a science experiment gone wrong, but it had good bones. I saw the potential. I also saw my younger brother, Kai, struggling. He'd just married Jordan, and they were living in a cramped, overpriced apartment, barely making ends meet with his part-time gigs and her, well, Jordan mostly focused on her social media influencing aspirations, which hadn't quite taken off. "It's perfect, Alina," Kai had gushed when I first showed him the duplex. "Still a mess, but mine. You're amazing." "The upstairs unit is self-contained," I'd said, already formulating the offer in my head. 2 bedrooms, decent kitchen space once I fix it up. Why don't you and Jordan move in? No rent, just cover your own utilities, get on your feet, save up a deposit for your own place. Kai's eyes had welled up. "You'd do that? Really?" Jordan, standing beside him, had managed a tight smile and "That's very generous, Alina." Even then her gratitude felt a little strained, a little too polite, but I'd brushed it off. Kai was my brother. I wanted to help, so they moved in. I lived in my own tiny rental across town, pouring every spare cent and moment into renovating their unit first, then the downstairs one, which I planned to rent out to cover the mortgage. I worked double shifts at the restaurant, took on freelance graphic design projects that had me staring at a screen until 3 a.m. My diet consisted of coffee and determination, new clothes, a vacation. Those were luxuries for a different lifetime. The duplex was my priority, my sacrifice. The first year they were great. Kai would sometimes help with the heavy lifting on my renovation days for the downstairs unit. Jordan would occasionally bring me a glass of lemonade, complimenting my progress with wide, seemingly sincere eyes. "You're making it so beautiful, Alina. We're so lucky." But slowly, things began to shift. It was subtle at first. After I finished the downstairs unit and got good tenants in, the mortgage was covered, but property taxes and maintenance was still a beast. One summer, their air conditioner broke. It was an older unit, sure, but I suspected it had been run non-stop at Arctic temperatures. "Alina," Jordan had called, her voice breezy, "the AC's dead. It's like an oven up here. When can you get it fixed?" "Oh, that's not good," I'd said, already calculating the cost. "Did you try resetting the breaker or checking the filter?" A pause. No, that sounds complicated. It's your unit, so we figured you'd handle it." I bit back a sigh. "Okay, I'll call a repairman." It cost me $600 I didn't really have. They didn't offer to chip in. When I gently suggested that maybe they could be a bit more mindful of its usage, Jordan had looked affronted. "We pay our utilities, Alina. We should be able to be comfortable." Then there was the time Kai mentioned they were thinking of getting a dog, a big one, in my newly renovated unit with its freshly polished original hardwood floors. "A dog?" I'd asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Kai, we talked about this. The lease agreement for the other tenants is no pets, and I'd prefer to keep it consistent. Plus, the potential for damage." "Oh, come on, Alina," he'd wheedled. "It's practically our home. Jordan's always wanted a golden retriever." "It is my home, Kai, my investment, and the answer is no, not right now." He'd sulked for a week, and Jordan had been icily polite the next time I saw her. Life has a way of just happening. I got busier with my own career, slowly climbing the ladder at a marketing firm. The tenants downstairs were quiet and paid on time. Kai and Jordan seemed settled. I'd drop by for holidays, birthdays, we'd exchange texts. "Everything good?" I'd ask Kai. "Yep, all quiet here, sis," he'd reply. He was always cheerful, if a bit vague. Jordan rarely initiated contact. I figured they were just living their lives, hopefully saving money, making plans. I trusted them. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I was just too exhausted from building my own life to scrutinize theirs too closely. It had been a few months since I'd last dropped by. With a rare Saturday off, I figured, why not? I grabbed a coffee and headed over, a little niggle of something I couldn't name sitting in my stomach. The little niggle in my stomach grew as I pulled up to the duplex. From the outside, everything looked the same. My sensible, slightly faded blue paint job. The neat, if uninspired flower beds I'd planted along the walkway. I walked up the steps to their unit, number 2, and noticed the front door was ajar, just a crack. That was unusual. Kai was usually so particular about locking up. I could hear noises from inside, a rhythmic thumping and a low hum, like some kind of industrial fan. Not sounds I associated with my brother's usual weekend routine of video games and napping. "Kai, Jordan," I called out, pushing the door open a little further. The sight that greeted me stopped me dead in my tracks. My coffee cup slipped from my fingers, splashing lukewarm liquid down my jeans and onto the pristine, new light oak flooring that definitely hadn't been there before. The entire front living area was different. Walls had been moved. Where my cosy, slightly worn but perfectly functional kitchen once stood, there was now an open-plan monstrosity. Gleaming white cabinets reached to the ceiling, accented with brushed gold hardware. A massive island topped with a slab of what looked suspiciously like Carrara marble dominated the centre of the room. Stainless steel appliances, the kind with digital displays and price tags that made my eyes water, were built into the custom cabinetry. It looked like something out of a glossy magazine, a style so far removed from my own practical taste, it was almost comical. I stumbled forward, my mind struggling to process. The thumping was coming from further back. I walked, as if in a dream, past the alien kitchen towards the main bathroom. The door was open, more marble, a freestanding soaking tub I knew for a fact cost more than my first car, a rainfall showerhead the size of a dinner plate. "Oh, good, you're here!" Jordan's voice, bright and cheerful, cut through my daze. She emerged from the master bedroom not in her usual yoga pants and oversized hoodie, but in a stylish linen jumpsuit, her hair perfectly coiffed. She was beaming, a wide, self-satisfied smile plastered on her face. She held a sleek, leather-bound folder in her hands. What is all this?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. "Surprise!" she chirped, gesturing around with a flourish. "We knew you've been so busy, Alina, and this place was just... well, it was a bit dated, wasn't it? So Kai and I decided to take the initiative. A little refresh. This was a gut job, a 6-figure top-to-bottom, no-expense-spared demolition and reconstruction." She stepped closer, her smile unwavering, and pressed the folder into my numb hands. "Here are all the invoices. We kept meticulous records. It came in just under 100,000. Not bad, right, for a full high-end remodel?" I stared at her, speechless. $100,000. She said it like she was announcing the score of a particularly good round of golf. "You can afford it, Alina," she continued, her tone now slightly patronizing, as if explaining something to a slow child. "And it's your house anyway. It needed an update. Think of the equity." Kai chose that moment to shuffle in from the hallway, looking sheepish, but also expectant. He wouldn't quite meet my eye. "Jordan," I finally found my voice, which came out hoarse. "What have you done?" "We've improved your investment, Alina," she said, puffing up slightly. "You should be thanking us." "Thanking you?" I repeated, the words catching in my throat. The shock was starting to wear off, replaced by a wave of icy fury that began in my toes and rose, chilling me to the bone. You spent nearly $100,000 on unauthorized renovations in my house, and you expect me to thank you and pay for it. Kai finally spoke, his voice defensive. Well, yeah, it's your property. It benefits you in the long run. Don't be so stingy, Alina. We did all the hard work of managing the contractors and picking everything out. Stingy, he called me stingy, after 5 years of rent-free living, after I'd sacrificed and saved to give them a leg up. The audacity was a physical blow. I could feel the blood draining from my face, then rushing back with a heat that made my ears burn. I looked from Kai's evasive face to Jordan's smug, confident one. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rage. I wanted to throw that ridiculously expensive marble-topped island through the brand-new picture window. Instead, a strange calm descended. A very cold, very clear calm. I closed my mouth, took a slow breath, and looked down at the folder in my hands. I didn't open it. I see, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion I was actually feeling. I need to process this. Jordan, seeing my stunned silence, added with a condescending smile, We even picked out finishes we knew you'd love. Eventually, consider it our gift to your portfolio. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a calculated move. A deliberate, entitled, breathtakingly arrogant heist. I have to go, I said quietly, turning on my heel. I walked out, leaving them standing in the opulent ruin of what used to be my sensible, carefully managed investment property. The smell of fresh paint and new grout followed me out the door, smelling like betrayal. The drive back to my own small, slightly cluttered apartment was a blur. The cold calm I'd managed to project in front of Kai and Jordan shattered the moment I closed my front door behind me. I sank onto my sofa, the leather folder still clutched in my hand, and the numbness gave way to a tremor that started in my hands and spread through my whole body. Betrayal. It was a raw physical ache in my chest. I replayed the scene over and over. Jordan's beaming face, Kai's mumbled accusation of me being stingy, the sheer, unadulterated gall of it. They hadn't just crossed a line, they'd bulldozed it, paved it over with marble and sent me the bill. How could they think this was okay? How could Kai, my own brother, stand by and let this happen, even participate? The hurt was a sharp, jagged thing. 5 years. 5 years I'd given them a home, a chance to build their future, and this was how they repaid me. Then a different thought began to surface through the pain. This wasn't impulsive. That level of renovation, the contractors, the specific high-end choices, it had to have been planned. Meticulously. I remembered an offhand comment Jordan had made months ago during a rare family dinner. "We're just bursting at the seams in that little kitchen," she'd sighed dramatically, swirling her wine. "It's impossible to entertain properly." At the time, I'd dismissed it as typical Jordan hyperbole. Now it felt like a breadcrumb. I grabbed my laptop. Jordan was obsessed with her online image, but her public social media was all carefully curated lifestyle shots. Nothing that would reveal a major renovation in a home that wasn't technically hers to renovate. Then I remembered Kai mentioning, with a roll of his eyes, Jordan's endless vision boards and digital scrapbooks. She used one of those cloud storage services, the one with the cutesy animal logo. It was a long shot, a desperate, ethically murky stab in the dark. I knew their wedding anniversary. I knew the name of the fluffy white cat Snowball that Jordan doted on, and that I'd expressly forbidden in the unit, a rule clearly ignored. I tried a few combinations: anniversary date plus Snowball, Snowball plus anniversary. Then Snowball followed by their wedding year. Bingo. I was in. My heart hammered against my ribs. A folder list appeared. Most were innocuous. Vacation ideas, recipe collection, influencer collabs, dreaming. And then there it was, our dream home project. My breath hitched. I clicked it open. It was all there, subfolders meticulously organised. Kitchen inspiration, bathroom finishes, contractor quotes. There were invoices, dozens of them, already paid from an account I didn't recognise. Probably joint savings they'd been siphoning into this instead of, say, a down payment on their own place. There were architectural drawings, detailed plans for my duplex unit, transforming it into their palace. And then the final damning piece of evidence, an email draft in a subfolder titled Comms. It was addressed to one of the main contractors, dated 6 months prior. It was from Jordan. Regarding payment, it read, "We will be managing the initial deposits. The final balance will be settled by the property owner, my sister-in-law Alina, once the project is complete and she is presented with the full scope of the value-adding upgrade. She's very supportive of us making the space our own. Supportive, value-adding upgrade." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely control the mouse. They hadn't just overstepped. They hadn't just been thoughtless or entitled. They had actively, deliberately, and with months of premeditation, conspired to defraud me. They'd planned to spring this on me, counting on my shock, my desire to avoid family conflict, or perhaps my supposed wealth, to bully me into paying for their fantasy. The hurt didn't disappear, but it was now overlaid with something else, a cold, hard fury, a steely resolve that settled deep in my bones. They wanted to play me for a fool. They thought I'd just roll over. I picked up my phone, my fingers surprisingly steady as I dialed. "Amara," I said when my best friend answered, "you are not going to believe what just happened." I laid it all out, the surprise visit, the marble monstrosity, the folder of bills, Kai's accusation. Amara listened, punctuated by gasps and horrified silences. "No freaking way," she breathed when I finished. "Alina, that's grand larceny with a side of delusion." "Tell me about it," I said, the cold anger making my voice flat. "And I found their plans, Amara, online. They've been plotting this for at least 6 months. Okay, deep breaths," Amara said, her voice instantly shifting into practical, supportive mode. "First, you are not paying a single cent, not one. Second, you need a lawyer, like yesterday." "I know," I said. The thought had already begun to form. "I know a guy," Amara said. "Stephen Norris. He's a shark, but he's fair. Specialises in property and contract disputes. He'll eat them for breakfast." Staring at their secret plans, the betrayal was a fresh stab. They hadn't just overstepped. They'd conspired. My desire for simple repayment morphed into something colder, more calculated. They wanted to play games? Fine. I'd learn the rules. I booked an appointment with Stephen Norris for Monday morning. Stephen Norris's office was all sleek lines and muted tones, a stark contrast to the chaos raging inside me. He was a man in his late 40s, sharp eyes, sharper suit, and a handshake that meant business. I laid out the whole sordid tale, from my initial offer of a rent-free haven to the marble-clad ambush, and the damning contents of Jordan's Dream Home Project folder, copies of which I'd printed and brought with me. He listened intently, occasionally jotting down a note, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Miss Henderson," he began, his voice calm and measured, "your brother and sister-in-law have, to put it mildly, acted egregiously. They had no legal right to make alterations of that magnitude without your explicit written consent, and they certainly have no legal standing to demand you pay for said alterations." A small knot of tension I hadn't realised I was holding loosened in my chest. "So, I don't have to pay?" "Absolutely not," Stephen confirmed. "In fact, you have several avenues here. You could sue them for the cost of restoring the property to its original condition if that's what you wished. You could evict them for breach of your verbal tenancy agreement. Their unauthorized renovations constitute a significant breach. He paused. Or you could explore other resolutions. The idea of simply evicting them and suing for damages was tempting, a quick, clean cut. But then I thought of Jordan's smug face, Kai's accusation. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the audacity, the sheer, unmitigated entitlement. "What kind of other resolutions?" I asked. Stephen's lips curved into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "Well, they've significantly, if illegally, increased the value of your asset. We could certainly leverage that." I left his office an hour later, a plan beginning to take shape, a cold, satisfying counter-offensive. He'd given me clarity and, more importantly, a sense of control I hadn't felt since I'd walked into that renovated nightmare. Meanwhile, back in their marble palace, Kai and Jordan were clearly growing impatient. A few days after my visit, Jordan's text started. "Hey Alina, just wondering about that Reno payment. The contractor for the countertops is asking about the final installment. Let me know when you can transfer." The smiley face was particularly galling. I ignored it. 2 days later, another one. "Alina, seriously, we need to get these bills paid. It's starting to get awkward. Can you at least give us a timeline?" I continued to ignore them. Let them sweat. Let them wonder. Then photos started appearing on my cousin Sarah's social media feed. Kai and Jordan beaming, hosting a small dinner party in their new kitchen. Gleaming marble, artfully arranged charcuterie board, Jordan raising a champagne flute. The caption, "Housewarming, kinda, at Kai and Jordan's gorgeous new place. So jelly, erst schon new kitchen vibes on dream home." My jaw tightened. They were already showing it off, claiming it as their own, before I'd even agreed to foot the bill they'd fraudulently run up in my name. The nerve was boundless. Then came the call I'd been dreading, but also expecting. My mother, Nancy. "Alina, darling," she began, her voice laced with that familiar tone of gentle persuasion she used when she wanted me to smooth over family ripples. "Kai called. He's very upset. He said there's been a misunderstanding about some work they did on the house." "A misunderstanding, Mom?" I kept my voice carefully neutral. "They gutted my property and expect me to pay $100,000 for renovations. I never approved." "That's not a misunderstanding. That's a demand." "Oh, Alina, don't be so dramatic," she sighed. "He said Jordan got a bit carried away, but their intentions were good. It does look lovely from what he described. Can't you just sort this out? It's family. Perhaps pay half, or work out a payment plan with them. For peace' sake." I could hear Kai's one-sided, woe-is-me version of events echoing in her words. He'd conveniently left out the premeditated planning, the secret folders, the sheer scale of the deception. "Mum, there's more to this than Kai is telling you," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "I'm looking into it. I'll handle it." "Well, I hope so, dear. Family is too important to let silly things like money come between you. Silly things like money, like $100,000 of my money they'd spent without my permission." I hung up, feeling a fresh wave of anger, not just at Kai and Jordan, but at the way my family always seemed to expect me to be the accommodating one, the one to absorb the costs, emotional or financial. The next day, another text from Jordan. This one took the cake. "Hey, so we were thinking, since the main bath turned out so well, we should probably do the guest bathroom to match. Keep the flow, you know? What are your thoughts on a clawfoot tub? You'd love it. We found a great one, only a few grand. Let me know if you want the link. XOXO." The sheer, unadulterated, gold-plated nerve of it almost made me laugh. Almost. They were already planning phase 2 of their hostile takeover of my finances and my property. They truly believed they were going to get away with it, They had no idea what was coming. The first step in my counter-offensive was to get an official valuation. On Stephen Norris's recommendation, I contacted Leah Jensen, a certified appraiser. I met her at a coffee shop near her office, not at the duplex. I didn't want Kai and Jordan getting wind of anything yet. So the situation is a little unusual, I began, handing Leah a coffee. My tenants, who are family, unfortunately, undertook extensive renovations without my consent. They're very high-end. Leah raised an eyebrow. Unauthorized renovations? That's a messy one. Are we talking new paint or something more substantial? Marble countertops, new layout, luxury appliances, the works, I said. Professionally done, from what I can tell, just entirely unapproved and unbudgeted by me. I see, she said, tapping her pen on her notepad. And you need an appraisal reflecting the current state of the property, including these additions? Exactly, I confirmed. As is. I need to know what it's worth now with all their, improvements. Leah was discreet and efficient. She visited the property a few days later, while Kai and Jordan were presumably at their respective day jobs, or, in Jordan's case, curating content. I'd given her a key. She called me that afternoon. Well, Alina, Leah said, a note of surprise in her voice. Your tenants certainly have expensive taste, and they hired competent, if presumptuous, contractors. The workmanship is surprisingly good for an unauthorized job. The value of your property has increased significantly. She emailed me the official report later that day. The numbers were staggering. The duplex unit, with its unwanted but undeniably luxurious makeover, was now valued at nearly $150,000 more than I'd paid for the entire building 5 years ago. My jaw tightened. They'd spent close to $100,000 of their, or soon-to-be my, money, and, in doing so, had gifted me a substantial bump in equity. The irony was almost painful, yet deeply satisfying. Armed with this concrete valuation, the next phase of my plan clicked into place. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Kai. His voice, when I answered, was dripping with a syrupy, unfamiliar remorse. Alina, hey, sis, listen, I wanted to apologize about the house and everything. I waited, saying nothing. I could hear faint whispering in the background. Jordan, no doubt, coaching him. Jordan, well, she gets these ideas, you know, and she just runs with them. She got a bit carried away. We both did. We're really sorry if it caused you any stress. Stress? That was one word for it. Financial ruin was another. We were thinking, he continued, the false sincerity practically oozing through the phone. Maybe we could talk, properly, about the renovations. Maybe we can contribute a little something towards it. You know, help out with the cost. A little something after they'd presented me with a bill for $100,000. The whispering in the background got a little louder, more insistent. Jordan was clearly feeding him lines. This wasn't an apology. It was a pathetic attempt to gauge my reaction, to see if I was softening, to perhaps trick me into committing to pay something, anything, so they could claim I'd agreed. I almost laughed. Instead, I kept my voice cool, non-committal. Of course, Kai, we should definitely talk. It's a significant situation. Great, he said, relief evident in his tone. When are you free? We can come over to your place, or... Actually, I interjected smoothly, why don't you both come over to the house next Saturday, say around 11? We can discuss its future then. The house? Oh, yeah, sure, that works, he said, a little surprised. He probably expected me to be avoiding the scene of the crime. We'll be there. Perfect, I said. I'll see you both then. I hung up, a grim smile playing on my lips. They thought they were reeling me in. They had no idea they were swimming straight into the net. The next week was a flurry of activity. I met with Stephen Norris again. We went over the appraisal, the figures, the strategy. He was thorough, his legal mind dissecting every angle. By the end of our second meeting, we had 2 documents drafted, printed on crisp, official-looking paper. The first was a new lease agreement, a standard rental contract, but with one crucial difference: the monthly rent. It was calculated based on the current fair market value for a newly renovated luxury 2-bedroom unit in that neighbourhood, a figure significantly higher than my mortgage, property taxes and insurance combined, a figure I knew they couldn't possibly afford. The second document was an offer of sale, a straightforward proposal for them to purchase the unit from me. The price, the new, much higher appraised value, reflecting all their hard work and investment. I placed both documents into a neat manila folder. I sent the calendar invite through email. Meeting to discuss property matters. Simple, formal. Let them think they were about to get what they wanted. Let them walk in, confident and smug, ready for me to finally cave. The anticipation was a tight coil in my stomach, but it wasn't anxiety, it was the thrill of the hunt. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect backdrop for the storm I was about to unleash. I arrived at the duplex a good hour before Kai and Jordan were due, the manila folder heavy in my tote bag. I let myself into their unit, my unit, using the key I still had. The air still smelled faintly of new paint and expensive wood. I walked through the transformed space, my footsteps echoing on the light oak floors. The marble countertops gleamed under the recessed lighting. It was undeniably beautiful, in a cold, show-home kind of way, a monument to their audacity. I felt surprisingly calm. The weeks of anger, hurt, and meticulous planning had distilled into a cold, clear focus. I knew exactly what I was going to do, exactly what I was going to say. There was no room for doubt, no space for wavering. I made myself a cup of tea using their ridiculously high-tech kettle, the kind that could probably launch a rocket if you pressed the wrong button, and sat at the huge marble island. I arranged the documents from my folder neatly in front of me, waiting. At precisely 11 o'clock, I heard their car pull up, footsteps on the stairs, a knock on the door they now treated as their own. "Come in," I called out, my voice even. Kai entered first, looking nervous, his eyes darting around as if expecting a trap. Jordan followed, and any nervousness she might have felt was expertly masked by that familiar, infuriatingly smug expression. She was dressed impeccably, of course, in some sort of cream-coloured cashmere sweater and perfectly tailored trousers. She looked like she owned the place, which, in her mind, I suppose she did. "Alina, hi," Jordan chirped, her smile wide and a little too bright. "Thanks for having us over. So glad we can finally sort this all out." "Kai, Jordan," I greeted them, my tone polite, almost bland. "Please, have a seat." I gestured to the new bar stools tucked under the island. They sat, Kai perching uneasily on the edge of his stool, Jordan settling in with an air of expectation. She glanced at the folder in front of me, a flicker of something triumph in her eyes. She probably thought it contained a cheque, or at least a payment plan proposal heavily weighted in her favour. "Coffee?" I offered, playing the gracious hostess in their stolen palace. "Oh, no, thank you. We're fine," Jordan said, waving a dismissive hand. "We just had brunch." Of course they did, probably at some trendy spot celebrating their impending victory. An awkward silence descended for a moment. I let it hang there, watching them. Kai fidgeted with the strap of his watch. Jordan examined her perfectly manicured nails. Finally, Jordan broke the silence, unable to resist guiding the conversation. "So," she began, leaning forward slightly, her voice conspiratorial, "this place, right? It's just amazing now. Don't you think? It finally feels like a real home." I met her gaze. "It's certainly different," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Different in a good way," she pressed. All the agents say kitchens and bathrooms sell houses, Alina. We've basically future-proofed your investment. That marble, Italian, and the appliances are all top of the line, energy efficient too. She rattled off brand names and features as if she were a salesperson on commission. Kai chimed in, emboldened by Jordan's confidence. Yeah, Alina, we put a lot of thought into it, a lot of work. Those contractors weren't easy to manage, let me tell you. I nodded slowly, letting them talk, letting them dig their own graves a little deeper. I even managed a small, non-committal hum of agreement when Jordan pointed out a particularly hideous and undoubtedly expensive light fixture they'd chosen for the dining area. Yes, I said when they finally paused for breath, you've certainly put a lot of work into making it unique. The anticipation in the room was thick enough to spread on toast. They were practically vibrating with it, waiting for me to acknowledge their brilliance, their foresight, and, most importantly, to open my checkbook. Jordan's smug smile was fixed in place. Kai looked like a kid waiting for a promised treat. I let a small, almost imperceptible smile play on my lips. Well, I began, placing my hand on the manila folder, my fingers brushing against the crisp edges of the documents within. I paused, drawing out the moment, savouring the shift in the air as their expectant smiles wavered slightly, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. I've given this a lot of thought, I continued, my voice calm and steady. A great deal of thought, and I've made some decisions regarding the house and your substantial contributions to its value. I looked them both directly in the eye, first Kai, then Jordan, holding their gaze for a beat longer than comfortable. The air in the ridiculously opulent kitchen crackled. First, I said, my voice even and cold, sliding a glossy, professionally bound document across the marble island towards them. I want to thank you. Your unauthorized yet extensive renovations have significantly increased the market value of my property. I tapped the cover of the document. This is the official appraisal report conducted last week. I watched their faces. Kai frowned, looking confused. Jordan's smug smile widened a fraction, a predatory gleam in her eyes. She clearly thought this was the prelude to me capitulating, perhaps even offering them a bonus for their vision. She reached for the report. So, I continued, my voice dropping a notch, losing any hint of warmth it might have feigned earlier. I slid a second document across the island, this one a standard legal form. Effective the 1st of next month, your rent will be adjusted to reflect the current luxury market rate for such a beautifully renovated home. I paused, letting the words sink in. That will be $3,500 per month. Their smiles vanished, instantly, utterly. Jordan's jaw quite literally dropped. Her perfectly lipsticked mouth hung open in a silent O of disbelief. Kai went pale, his eyes widening as he stared at the new lease agreement I'd just presented. Before either of them could recover enough to speak, I pressed on, my voice like ice. Or, of course, I added, sliding a third document, the purchase offer, towards them. You have another option. You can purchase the property from me. I gave them a thin, humourless smile. Given your substantial investment and clear emotional attachment to the place, it only seems fair to offer it to you first. I tapped the purchase offer. The price, based on the new appraisal which reflects all your wonderful upgrades, is $475,000. Silence. A thick, stunned, suffocating silence filled the room. The only sound was the faint hum of the brand new top-of-the-line refrigerator. Then chaos erupted. "What?" Jordan finally shrieked, her voice cracking. She shot to her feet, knocking her bar stool slightly askew. "You can't do that! $3,500 a month? Are you insane?" "It's the current market rate, Jordan," I replied calmly, though my heart was hammering. "For a unit of this quality, in this location, with these finishes. Your finishes, I might add." But we did all the work!" Kai stammered, his face a mask of bewildered outrage. "We paid for it. You can't just charge us rent on our own improvements." "Actually, Kai, you made improvements to my property," I corrected him, my voice still level. "Improvements I never asked for, never approved, and certainly never agreed to pay for. You presented me with a bill for nearly $100,000. I'm merely adjusting the terms of your tenancy to reflect the new reality you've created." "This is outrageous! It's unfair!" Jordan was practically screaming now, her face flushed an ugly red that clashed horribly with her cashmere sweater. "We're family. You're supposed to help us, not extort us." "Extort you?" I raised an eyebrow. "I believe you were the ones who presented me with an unexpected 6-figure bill after conducting major renovations without my permission. I'm offering you choices. Pay the fair market rent for the luxury apartment you've designed for yourselves, or buy it at its fair market value. A value, I remind you, that you yourselves established with your contributions." Kai was shaking his head, looking utterly defeated. We don't have that kind of money, Alina. You know that. We can't afford that rent. We can't afford to buy it." His voice was a desperate whisper. "Then perhaps you should have considered that before you decided to play real estate developer with my assets," I said, my patience wearing thin. The cold fury was back, bubbling just beneath the surface of my calm demeanour. Jordan screeched, "You're evil, Alina! This is our home!" Her eyes blazed with a mixture of fury and panic. I met her furious gaze unflinching. "No, Jordan, this is my house, which you treated like your personal ATM and showroom. You made your choices when you forged ahead with this ridiculous, unauthorized renovation. You made your choices when you expected me to just gratefully pay for your lavish tastes. Now you have new ones to make." I stood up, collecting my copy of the documents. "You have 30 days to either sign the new lease agreement or accept the purchase offer. If neither of those options works for you, you have 30 days to vacate the premises." I walked towards the door, leaving them standing there, amidst the splendour they had so arrogantly created, their faces a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. The silence that followed my ultimatum was more satisfying than any shouting match could ever have been. The 30 days that followed my ultimatum were a maelstrom. My phone blew up with panicked calls from Kai, his voice alternating between pleading and accusing. "Alina, you can't be serious. We'll be homeless. How could you do this to your own brother?" Jordan, after her initial outburst, resorted to a barrage of texts. They started demanding, "You will regret this, Alina. We have rights." Then shifted to bargaining. Okay, what if we pay you back for the Reno over time? Like a tiny bit each month, and you keep the rent the same." And finally devolved into desperate, tearful pleas. "Please, Alina, we made a mistake. A huge mistake. Don't do this to us. We'll do anything." They tried to rally the family, of course. My mother, Nancy, called again, her voice tight with distress. "Alina, Philip and I are very concerned. Kai is beside himself. Jordan is a wreck. Can't you find it in your heart to compromise? They're offering to pay you back eventually. This time I was prepared." "Mom," I said calmly, "did Kai tell you they'd been planning this for over 6 months? Did he show you the Dream Home Project folder Jordan kept, detailing how they were going to present me with the bill for their upgrade?" Silence on the other end of the line. "I'm emailing you copies, Mom, you and Dad, so you can see the full picture." I sent them the evidence, the invoices, the email drafts, the whole sordid plan. When Mom called back later, her tone was subdued. "Oh, Alina, I had no idea it was so calculated." She still tried a weak, "But they're young, they make mistakes." But the conviction was gone. Even she couldn't defend this level of premeditated deceit. Philip, true to form, said little, but I could tell he was shocked. Kai and Jordan scrambled. They couldn't afford the new rent, not even close. and getting a mortgage for nearly $500,000, especially when they were already carrying the secret debt from the contractors they'd hired for my house, was an impossibility. Their frantic attempts to find a financial loophole, a sympathetic lender, or a rich relative to bail them out all failed. On the 29th day, a moving truck pulled up to the duplex. I didn't go over. I didn't need to. My lawyer had already informed theirs that I expected the property to be left in pristine condition, as per the terms of their original, albeit verbal and now thoroughly violated, agreement. They complied, probably on legal advice or perhaps holding on to a sliver of hope that a demonstration of good behaviour might make me relent at the 11th hour. I didn't. Amara helped me do the final walkthrough after they'd gone. The place was immaculate, spotless. Every marble surface gleamed. Every high-end appliance shone. It was also eerily empty, stripped of all their personal belongings, all traces of their occupancy. All that remained was the monument to their greed and my victory. "Wow," Amara breathed, looking around the cavernous, empty kitchen. "They really did a number on this place. Expensive, but wow." "Yep," I said, running a hand over the cool marble island. "And now it's going to make me a tidy profit." I put the unit on the rental market the very next day, at the full $3,500 rate. It was snapped up in less than a week by a young doctor and her architect husband who adored the modern luxurious finishes. They signed a 2-year lease. The last I heard, through the family grapevine, Kai and Jordan were crammed into a tiny, run-down one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, the kind of place they'd probably sneered at 5 years ago. Their relationship, already strained by Jordan's expensive tastes and Kai's spinelessness, was reportedly crumbling under the weight of their self-inflicted financial disaster and the mountain of debt they still owed to the contractors. Apparently, those meticulous records Jordan kept didn't extend to actually paying all the final bills once it became clear I wasn't going to. My relationship with Kai is fractured, maybe irreparably. He avoids my calls and family gatherings are tense. My parents are still walking on eggshells around me, a mixture of residual disappointment in Kai and a new wary respect for me. It's not perfect, but a huge weight has been lifted from my shoulders. I stood up for myself. I drew a line in the sand, and when they stomped all over it in diamond-studded stilettos, I made them pay the price. The financial gain from the increased rent is undeniably satisfying. It's more than covering the mortgage and expenses. It's actually building my savings at a rate I'd only dreamed of. But the real satisfaction, the deep, quiet hum of contentment, comes from the karma. They thought they were so clever, so entitled, so much smarter than hard-working, sensible Alina. They thought they could take and then demand more. Instead, they dug their own gold-plated ditch, and I simply handed them the shovels and let them lie in it. Some might call it harsh, but as I cashed that first new rent check, all I could think was that they had every chance to be grateful, to be respectful, to be decent. Instead, they chose greed. And greed, as they learned, has a very steep price, especially when you try to send the bill to someone else.
The sound of papers scattering across our imported marble floor echoed through our penthouse living room. I watched years of careful documentation flutter around me like expensive confetti while my husband, Michael, stood over me with that familiar look of smug superiority. "Really, Rebecca," he said, adjusting his Rolex. "You thought you could just walk into my office and accuse me of fraud? With what evidence? These?" He kicked at one of the fallen folders. "No one's going to believe the trophy wife who spends her days planning charity galas. My name is Rebecca Sterling, and at 34, I was about to destroy the man I've been married to for 8 years. Michael saw what he wanted to see, a beautiful former model who'd given up her career to be the perfect corporate wife. What he didn't see was the economics degree from Penn, or the 2 years I'd spent in forensic accounting before meeting him. You're right, I said, keeping my voice steady as I knelt to gather the scattered papers. What was I thinking? He laughed, already dismissing me as he pulled out his phone. I have a meeting downtown. Clean this up before the housekeeper sees it. And Becca. He paused at the door. Let's not have this conversation again. Stick to what you're good at, looking pretty and keeping my social calendar in order. The moment the elevator doors closed behind him, I stopped picking up papers and instead pulled out my phone, sending a quick text to my sister Lauren. It's time. Meet me at the usual place in an hour. Then I walked to our bedroom, straight to my jewelry box. The antique locket that had belonged to my grandmother hung innocently among the expensive pieces Michael had given me over the years. He'd never understood why I insisted on wearing such a simple piece to important events when I had millions in diamonds at my disposal. I opened the locket now, carefully removing the tiny flash drive hidden behind the old photograph. 8 years of evidence meticulously collected and backed up, all stored in something he'd dismissed as sentimental junk. The cafe where I met Lauren was deliberately chosen, small, cash only, and far from Michael's usual haunts. My sister was already there, her laptop open and ready. You finally confronted him, she said as I sat down, no preamble needed. We've been planning this for months. I nodded, pulling out the flash drive. He reacted exactly as we expected. Condescending, dismissive, certain I couldn't touch him. Lauren's fingers flew across the keyboard as she began downloading the files. Does he have any idea how long you've been watching him? No, I said, wrapping my hands around a cup of coffee. He still thinks I spend my days getting manicures and planning his precious charity events. The truth was far more complex. I'd discovered Michael's fraud almost by accident 3 months into our marriage. A misfiled document, a series of numbers that didn't add up, and suddenly I'd seen behind a curtain of his real estate empire. At first, I'd been in denial. Michael Sterling was one of Boston's most respected developers, known for transforming struggling neighborhoods into luxury properties. His company, Sterling Development, was worth hundreds of millions. Surely I was misreading the documents. But then I started paying attention, really paying attention. The community improvement projects that mysteriously fell through after he'd received government grants. The historic buildings that suffered convenient accidents right after he purchased them at low prices. The string of shell companies that seemed to exist only to move money between accounts. Look at this, Lauren said now, turning her laptop screen toward me. She'd pulled up one of Michael's recent developments, a luxury high-rise in what used to be a working-class neighborhood. The numbers don't match what he reported to the city council. He claimed the project would cost $50 million. But according to these bank transfers, he only spent $30 million. I finished. The rest disappeared into offshore accounts, and that's just one project. Lauren shook her head, her expression grim. How did he get away with this for so long? Because he's careful. He spreads the fraud across multiple projects, multiple companies. Unless you're looking at the whole picture, each discrepancy seems minor. I took another sip of coffee. Plus, he has half the city council in his pocket. Amazing what regular charitable donations can buy. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Dinner with the Andersons tonight. Wear the blue versus, and be more pleasant than you were this morning. I showed the message to Lauren, who rolled her eyes. God, he's such a patronizing ass. How did you stand it for 8 years? Because I needed to be sure, I said quietly. Sure of the evidence, sure of his guilt, sure that when I finally moved against him, it would stick. The truth was, it had taken years to understand the full scope of Michael's operation. He wasn't just defrauding investors and government agencies. He was destroying communities, forcing out longtime residents so he could build luxury properties that sat half empty while he collected tax breaks. The FBI contact is ready, Lauren said, lowering her voice even though no one was near our table. Agent Martinez says as soon as we give him the signal, they'll move. I nodded, thinking of the careful groundwork we'd laid. The recordings hidden in Michael's home office, capturing conversations with corrupt officials. The paper trail I'd pieced together showing how he laundered money through fake renovation projects. The witness statements from former employees who'd been silenced with threats and payoffs. What about the safety deposit boxes? Lauren asked. Already taken care of, I assured her. I moved everything to the new location last week while he was in New York. Bank records, backup drives, original documents, it's all secure. My sister reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Are you sure you want to go through with this, once we pull the trigger? He has to be stopped, I said firmly. You haven't seen what I've seen, Lauren. The families displaced by his developments, the small businesses forced to close, the lives he's ruined while he sits in his penthouse counting his millions. Lauren nodded, understanding in her eyes. She'd been my confidant through all of this, helping me gather evidence, providing technical support, being my sounding board when the weight of it all became too heavy. The Anderson dinner tonight, she said thoughtfully. That's perfect timing, actually. Half the city's power players will be there. I smiled slightly, already seeing the possibilities. Michael loved these dinners, loved holding court among Boston's elite. He'd never suspect that his perfectly coiffed wife was about to bring his entire empire crashing down. I better go get ready then, I said, standing up. Wouldn't want to disappoint my husband by being late to his important dinner. Back at the penthouse, I took my time getting ready. The blue Versace dress Michael had specified hung in my closet, a $12,000 piece of fabric that was supposed to show off his wealth and taste. I slipped it on, carefully applied my makeup, and fastened my grandmother's locket around my neck. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what Michael thought I was, the beautiful, compliant wife who knew her place. The perfect accessory to his carefully crafted image. If he'd ever bothered to really know me, he might have wondered why I always insisted on handling the seating arrangements for his business dinners. Why I volunteered to organize his charitable foundation's documents. Why I spent so much time in his home office, supposedly planning social events. But Michael saw what he wanted to see, and tonight that blindness would be his undoing. The Andersons' dining room was filled with the quiet murmur of Boston's elite when Michael and I arrived. Robert Anderson's mansion in Beacon Hill was the perfect setting for what was about to unfold. Old money, old power, and enough ego in one room to float a yacht. Rebecca, darling. Sarah Anderson air-kissed my cheeks. That dress is divine. Michael always makes sure you're the most beautiful woman in the room. I smiled, letting the backhanded compliment roll off me. You're too kind. I love what you've done with the place. The new chandelier is exquisite. As we moved through the crowd, I felt Michael's hand on my lower back, steering me towards specific groups. This was our usual dance. He'd talk business while I played the charming wife, laughing at the right moments, making sure everyone's glasses stayed full. Sterling. Commissioner Davis boomed, extending his hand to Michael. Just got the paperwork for the Riverside project. Everything looks in order. I watched Michael's face carefully as he shook the commissioner's hand. The Riverside project, his latest scheme to turn a historic waterfront neighborhood into luxury condos. The paperwork he'd submitted showed a $100 million investment. The real numbers, safely documented in my files, showed something very different. Excellent, Michael said smoothly. The city won't regret supporting this development. It'll transform the whole area. That's what we're afraid of, a quiet voice said from behind us. Elena Martinez stood there, elegant in a simple black dress. To everyone else, she was just another guest, the wife of a prominent real estate attorney. Only I knew she was actually FBI Special Agent Martinez, and this dinner was no coincidence. Michael's smile tightened slightly. Mrs. Martinez, I wasn't aware you and James would be here tonight. Sarah and I serve on the Historical Preservation Board together. Alana said pleasantly. We're quite concerned about the fate of some of our older buildings. So many unfortunate accidents lately. I felt Michael's hand tighten on my waist. Those accidents had helped him acquire prime properties at fraction of their value, after which the historical protection orders mysteriously disappeared. Progress requires change, he said dismissively. Rebecca, why don't you get me a fresh drink? I nodded obediently and headed toward the bar, but instead of ordering, I slipped into the powder room and pulled out my phone. A text from Lauren was waiting. Teams in position. Just say the word. My hands trembled slightly as I replied, now. When I returned to the dining room, everything appeared normal. Guests were taking their seats, servers were pouring wine, and Michael was holding court at the head of the table, explaining his latest development plans to an admiring audience. I sat down beside him, accepting a glass of wine from a server. Any moment now. Right on cue, phones around the table began buzzing. I watched as people pulled them out, faces changing as they read the breaking news alerts. My God, Robert Anderson said from across the table. Michael, Is this true? Michael frowned, reaching for his own phone. I saw the exact moment he read the headline. Sterling gevied under federal investigation for massive fraud. The color drained from his face as he scrolled through the article. The Boston Globe had done their job well, laying out years of fraudulent dealings backed by documents and witness statements. His careful house of cards was about to collapse. This is ridiculous, he sputtered, looking around the table. Obviously some sort of mistake. Is it? Elena Martinez stood up, pulling out her badge. Michael Sterling, I'm Special Agent Martinez with the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The dining room erupted in chaos as more agents entered. I sat quietly, sipping my wine as Michael was read his rights in front of Boston's most influential citizens. You? He turned to me, realization dawning in his eyes. You did this. I met his gaze calmly. No, Michael. You did this. I just made sure everyone would know about it. You stupid bitch, he snarled, lunging toward me. But agents quickly restrained him. You think you can understand my business? You're nothing but a trophy wife. I finished for him, standing up. That's what you wanted, isn't it? Someone beautiful and seemingly simple who wouldn't ask questions about where the money came from or why those historic buildings kept having convenient accidents. I reached for my locket, opening it to reveal the empty space where the flash drive had been. But you never bothered to look past the surface. Never wondered why I was so interested in handling your paperwork, organizing your files. You just assumed I was decorative, like everything else in your life. The room had gone silent, watching the scene unfold. I could see the moment it hit him, every private conversation in his office, every meeting with corrupt officials, every deal he thought was safely hidden. I'd been there, watching, documenting, building the case that would bring him down. Mrs. Sterling, Agent Martinez said formally, we'll need you to come in tomorrow to make a formal statement. I nodded, gathering my clutch. Of course. I have all the documentation you'll need. Bank records, property assessments, evidence of bribes. 8 years worth. 8 years. Michael's voice was barely a whisper. You've been planning this for 8 years? No, I corrected him. I've been gathering evidence for 8 years. I started planning this the day I found out you were destroying people's lives to build your empire. The day I realized that the man I married was nothing but a fraud in an expensive suit. As the agents led him away, I turned to the stunned dinner guests. I apologized for disrupting the evening. Sarah, the salmon, was lovely. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of depositions, interviews, and legal proceedings. Michael's empire began to crumble as investors pulled out and projects were halted. The evidence I'd gathered was damning, not just of him, but of numerous city officials and business partners who had enabled his schemes. Lauren helped me move out of the penthouse, into a modest but comfortable apartment far from the luxury high-rises Michael had built. What will you do now? She asked as we unpacked boxes. I smiled, pulling out my diploma and CPA license, things I'd kept hidden for years. I'm thinking of starting a consulting firm, helping small businesses and community organizations protect themselves from developers like Michael. Maybe do some forensic accounting on the side. The trophy wife turning corporate watchdog, Lauren laughed. I love it. The media had a field day with the story, of course. Sociology Anges und hier UPTDVELPER made headlines across the country. But what mattered more were the other stories, the families who could return to their neighborhoods, the small businesses that would survive, the communities that would stay intact. 6 months later, I sat in a courtroom watching Michael plead guilty to multiple federal charges. He looked smaller somehow, without his expensive suits and air of invincibility. The defendant is sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, the judge announced, and ordered to pay restitution of $400 million. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. I thought about all the times I'd stood beside Michael at press conferences, playing my part as the silent, beautiful wife. Mr. Sterling's crimes weren't just about money, I said into the microphones. They were about power, about the belief that wealth makes you untouchable. But no one is above the law, and no one should be allowed to destroy communities for profit. Later that evening, I sat in my new office, looking out over the city. My consulting firm was already gaining a reputation for helping expose corporate fraud and protecting community interests. The phone rang. Another potential client seeking help. As I reached for it, my grandmother's locket caught the light. I touched it gently, thinking of how such a small thing had helped bring down an empire. It reminded me of something my grandmother used to say: "The most dangerous weapon against evil is the truth, carried by someone everyone underestimates." Michael had built his world on lies, seeing only what he wanted to see. He'd wanted a trophy wife, so that's why I let him see, never realizing that sometimes the most effective weapon is the one hiding in plain sight. The crystal wine glass in my hand trembled slightly as I stared across our mahogany dining table at my stepmother Victoria. The perfectly cooked salmon on my plate suddenly tasted like a cardboard. "You did what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Victoria dabbed at her lips with a linen napkin, her red lipstick leaving a perfect mark. "Really, Charlotte, don't be dramatic. La Maison was dragging down the family's portfolio. I found buyers who'll probably turn it into one of those trendy fusion places." She waved her hand dismissively. "They're paying well above market value." My name is Charlotte Durant, and at 28, I was watching my stepmother of 3 years casually destroy my mother's legacy. La Maison wasn't just a restaurant, it was my childhood, my heritage, and the last real connection I had to my mother who had passed away 5 years ago. "Dad," I turned to my father, who was suddenly very interested in cutting his salmon into increasingly smaller pieces. "You can't let her do this. Mom built that restaurant from nothing. It's been in our family for 30 years. The decision's made, Charlie," he said softly, still not meeting my eyes. "Victoria's right. The restaurant's profits have been declining. Sometimes we have to make hard business decisions." I felt the familiar anger rise in my chest. Ever since he'd married Victoria, my father had become a shadow of himself, deferring to her on everything from family holidays to business decisions. The successful restaurateur who had supported my mother's dreams was gone, replaced by a man who seemed afraid of his own wife. "Hard business decisions," I repeated, "like selling a property you don't even own." La Maison was left to me in Mom's will. Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. "Actually, dear, your father maintained controlling interest as executor of the estate until you turned 30. We're well within our rights to sell." I set down my wine glass carefully, afraid I might shatter it in my grip. She was right. My mother's will had stipulated that my father would manage the restaurant until I turned 30, thinking he would protect it, nurture it, keep it running until I was ready to take over completely. What my mother hadn't anticipated was Victoria Torres, the glamorous real estate agent who had swept into our lives 3 years after her death, bringing with her an aggressive approach to modernizing our family's assets. "When?" I asked, proud of how steady my voice remained. "The new owners take possession next Friday," Victoria replied, taking a delicate sip of her wine. "They're paying cash, so the closing is expedited. I'll need you to handle the staff notifications and inventory clearance." Of course she would. Victoria always managed to delegate the unpleasant tasks to me, all while maintaining her image as the efficient, business-savvy stepmother who was just looking out for the family's interests. I pushed back my chair and stood up. "If you'll excuse me, I've lost my appetite." "Charlotte." My father finally looked up, his face lined with guilt. "Try to understand. The restaurant, it's not what it used to be. Your mother wouldn't want you tied to a failing business." I stared at him, remembering all the nights he and Mom had spent planning menus, selecting wines, building La Maison into one of the most respected French restaurants in Boston. How quickly he'd forgotten. "No," I said quietly. "Mom wouldn't want me to give up without a fight." I walked out of the dining room, Victoria's voice floating after me. "Really, Charles, I don't know why she's being so difficult about this. It's just a restaurant." Just a restaurant. As if La Maison could be reduced to mere brick and mortar, to profit margins and market value. She had no idea what that place really meant, what secrets it held. I drove through the rain-slicked streets of Boston to La Maison, using my key to enter through the kitchen door. The restaurant was closed on Mondays, and the familiar space was dark and quiet. I moved through the kitchen, running my hand along the stainless steel counters where I'd learned to cook at my mother's side. The main dining room was bathed in soft light from the street lamps outside, illuminating the hand-painted murals my mother had commissioned, scenes of the French countryside where she'd grown up. Each table was still perfectly set, white tablecloths gleaming, wine glasses sparkling. Victoria might see a failing business, but I saw decades of memories, of passion, of love. I made my way to the wine cellar door, hidden behind a vintage French poster. The heavy wooden door creaked slightly as I opened it, the temperature dropping as I descended the stone steps. This was where my mother had worked her real magic. The main wine cellar was impressive enough. Hundreds of bottles carefully cataloged and stored at perfect temperature. But it was the secret room behind the false wall that held La Maison's true treasure. My mother had started collecting rare wines in her 20s, long before she met my father. Over the years, she had amassed a collection that would make wine connoisseurs weep. I pressed the hidden latch and the false wall swung open silently. The room beyond was smaller, but every bottle here was worth more than most people made in a year. Chateau Lafayette Rothschild, 1869. Roman et Conti, 1945. Chateau Latour, 1961. My mother had collected them all. The entire collection was worth millions, but its existence was known only to me and Jean-Luc, our ancient sommelier who had worked with my mother for decades. We had kept it secret, protected it, waiting for the right moment to reveal its true value. That moment, it seemed, had arrived sooner than expected. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized but never used. After 3 rings, a familiar French-accented voice answered. "Ah, Charlotte, I was wondering when you would call." "Marcus," I said, "I need your help. It's time to make good on that promise you made to my mother." Marcus Durand had been my mother's mentor in her early days as a wine collector. Now he was one of the most respected wine authenticators in the world. "The collection?" he asked. "Is it at risk?" "Victoria is selling the restaurant. We have less than a week." He was quiet for a moment. "I can be there tomorrow morning. Have Jean-Luc prepare the documentation." After hanging up, I sent a text to Jean-Luc. "It's happening. Meet me at the restaurant tomorrow at 8 a.m. Then I sat down on the cool stone floor, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of wine, and finally let myself cry. Not just for the restaurant, but for my mother, for the legacy she'd built, for the father who seemed to have forgotten what any of it meant. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend and La Maison's head chef. "Sophie, just heard from the staff. That witch is really selling us out." "Not if I can help it," I replied. "Meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. We're activating Plan B." Sophie and I had been preparing for something like this ever since Victoria had started making noise about streamlining the family's assets. We had backups of all the restaurant's records, copies of my mother's original recipes, and most importantly, a list of loyal customers who would be very interested to learn about Victoria's plans. I stood up, brushing off my pants and taking one last look at the hidden wine room. My mother had always said that timing was everything, in cooking, in wine, in life. Victoria thought she was selling a failing restaurant. She had no idea she was about to uncork a vintage scandal. The next morning, La Maison's kitchen was alive with tension. Sophie stood at her usual place by the stove, but instead of preparing for service, she was reviewing documents with Jean-Luc. Marcus had arrived from New York, his expert's eye already gleaming at the prospect of examining the collection. "The documentation is perfect," Jean-Luc said, his weathered hands smoothing out the papers on the steel prep table. "Your mother kept records of every purchase, every authentication. The provenance is undeniable." Marcus nodded, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "And you've maintained perfect temperature control?" "The humidity levels." "Exactly as Madame Durand specified," Jean-Luc replied. "For 25 years, I have not deviated from her instructions by even 1 degree. "Then let's see them," Marcus said. I led the small group down to the cellar, watching their faces as I revealed the hidden room. Even Sophie, who had known about its existence, gasped at the sight of so many legendary wines in one place. Marcus moved through the collection with reverence, examining bottles, checking labels, making notes. After an hour, he turned to me with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Charlotte, this is extraordinary. The 1869 Lafayette alone would fetch over $230,000 at auction. The entire collection." He paused, making some quick calculations. "Conservatively, we're looking at $8 to $10 million. Sophie whistled softly. "No wonder your mother kept this secret." And the buyers Victoria found, I said, they have no idea this exists. Impossible, Jin-look scoffed. The false wall does not appear in any building plans. Only those Madame trusted knew of its existence. I smiled grimly. Perfect. Sophie, is everyone here? She nodded. The whole staff is waiting upstairs. They're scared, Charlotte. This place is their home too. We gathered in the main dining room. The servers, line cooks, dishwashers, everyone who had helped make La Maison special. Many had worked here for decades, hired by my mother when the restaurant was just starting out. I know you're worried, I began, looking at their familiar faces. But I promise you, La Maison isn't going anywhere. Victoria thinks she's selling a struggling restaurant. What she doesn't know is that we're about to make her an offer she can't legally refuse. I explained the plan, watching hope replace fear in their eyes. By the time I finished, there was a new energy in the room, a sense of purpose. What do you need us to do? Maria, our longest-serving server, asked. For now, business as usual, but be ready. When this breaks, it's going to get complicated. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Marcus worked with an art security firm to document and value every bottle. Jean-Luc compiled years of temperature and humidity logs. Sophie coordinated with our suppliers and regular customers, ensuring everyone was prepared for what was coming. The night before the sale was set to close, I sat in my mother's old office, looking at her photograph on the wall. She was standing in front of La Maison on opening night, young and beautiful and full of dreams. My phone buzzed. Victoria calling for the third time that day. I let it go to voicemail, already knowing what she wanted. She'd been trying to get me to sign some last-minute paperwork, probably trying to legally protect herself. The next morning, I arrived at the restaurant early. Victoria was already there with the buyers, a pair of sleek entrepreneurs in expensive suits who looked like they'd never worked in a kitchen in their lives. Charlotte, Victoria said with fake warmth. Good you're here. We just need your signature on a few things before we finish up. I smiled, setting my briefcase on one of the dining tables. Actually, I have something you all need to see first. The buyers looked confused as Marcus and Jean-Luc entered, carrying stacks of documentation. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. What's this about? We have a closing scheduled. Yes, I cut her off. About that. Did you disclose the wine cellar in the sale documents? She waved dismissively. Of course. The wine inventory is included. Not that wine cellar, I said quietly. The other one. The color drained from her face as I led everyone downstairs. The buyers' expressions changed from annoyance to amazement as the hidden room was revealed. Marcus began his presentation, discussing the value and rarity of each bottle. This collection, he concluded, represents one of the finest private wine collections in the world. Its total value exceeds $9 million. Victoria's perfectly manicured hands were shaking. This is ridiculous. Charles never mentioned. Because he didn't know, I said. Mom kept this separate from the family assets. It belongs solely to me, as specified in a separate trust document. I pulled out the paperwork my mother's lawyer had helped me locate. If you sell La Maison, you're also liable for the value of this collection, which was never included in the sale price. The buyers were already backing away, realizing the deal was about to get much more complicated. Victoria's face had turned an interesting shade of red. You planned this, she hissed. You let me arrange this sale knowing you had no right to sell my mother's restaurant in the first place? I finished. Yes, I did. Just like you planned to sell this place out from under me before I turned 30. My father chose that moment to appear at the cellar entrance, his face a mix of shock and something else. Was it pride? Charlie, he said softly. The collection, your mother never told me. She wanted to protect it, I replied. She wanted to make sure I would always have a choice about my future, that I couldn't be forced to give up her dream. Victoria turned to him, ready to launch into one of her manipulative speeches, but he held up his hand. No, Victoria. Enough. He looked around the cellar, then at me, really seeing me for the first time in years. The sale is off. La Maison stays in the family, just like Catherine wanted. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. Victoria moved out, unable to face the embarrassment of her failed scheme. My father, as if waking from a long sleep, began spending time at the restaurant again, rekindling his love for the business he and my mother had built together. La Maison's wine collection, now properly valued and insured, became the talk of the culinary world. Wine enthusiasts and collectors began making reservations months in advance, hoping to sample rare vintages that we carefully released from the collection. One evening, as I sat at the bar after closing, Sophie brought out a bottle from the secret cellar, a 1982 Bordeaux that had been my mother's favorite. "Your mom would be proud," she said, pouring 2 glasses, "not just of saving the restaurant, but of how you did it. You protected her legacy while creating your own." I took a sip, letting the complex flavors remind me of all the wine tastings my mother had hosted, all the knowledge she'd passed down. "You know what's funny?" I said. "Victoria thought she was so clever, trying to sell a failing restaurant. She never understood that the real value of this place isn't in the building or even in the wine. It's in the memories, the passion, the love that goes into every meal and every bottle we serve." My father joined us, looking more like his old self than he had in years. "Your mother used to say that a great restaurant was like a great wine. It gets better with age, but only if you respect its history while allowing it to evolve." He raised his glass. "To Catherine, who knew exactly what she was doing when she created that secret cellar. And to you, Charlie, for being every bit as clever and determined as she was." As we toasted, I looked around at the restaurant, at the staff cleaning up, at the paintings on the walls, at the warmth and character that no trendy fusion place could ever replicate. Victoria had tried to reduce it all to numbers on a spreadsheet, but she had failed to understand the most important lesson my mother ever taught me. Some things are worth more than money. Some things can't be bought or sold. Some things, like love and legacy and the perfect glass of wine, only grow more valuable with time. La Maison didn't just survive, it thrived. We maintained our traditional French cuisine while carefully innovating, just as my mother would have wanted. The secret wine cellar became a legend in culinary circles, with select bottles occasionally offered for truly special occasions. Victoria, I heard, had moved to Miami and was trying to rebuild her real estate career. My father found his passion for the restaurant business again, mentoring young chefs and sharing stories about the early days with Mom. And me, I stood at the helm of La Maison, honoring my mother's legacy while creating my own. Every night, as I walked through the dining room, greeting guests and suggesting wine pairings, I felt her presence, not as a ghost, but as an inspiration. Because in the end, she had given me more than a restaurant or a priceless wine collection. She had given me the tools to fight for what mattered, the wisdom to wait for the right moment, and the confidence to know that sometimes the best revenge is simply proving them wrong. The crystal stemware clinked as Eleanor Matthews raised her glass, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping it just a bit too tightly. The candlelight caught the enormous diamonds on her hand. A reminder, as if anyone needed one, of the Matthews family's wealth and status. "To my son," she declared, her voice carrying across the private dining room at Le Cirque, "who carries forward our family's proud legacy." Her eyes fixed on me, sharp as daggers. "Despite certain complications. My name is Sarah Matthews, though according to my mother-in-law, I'll never truly be a Matthews. After 5 years of marriage to her son James, I'm still the secretary who got lucky." If only she knew that while she was planning this elaborate anniversary dinner to remind me of my place, I had been in my office, closing a deal that would save the very legacy she was so proud of. "Mother," James said, a warning note in his voice. "Not tonight." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so sensitive, darling. We're all family here." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, though some of us understand the weight of that name better than others. I took a sip of my wine, letting the expensive vintage roll across my tongue. 5 years ago, her words would have cut deep. Now they just made me think of the signed contract sitting in my office safe, and the look that would be on her face tomorrow at the board meeting. "How is the company doing, James?" Eleanor turned to her son. "Your father would be so proud to see you at the helm of Matthews Industries." I watched my husband's face carefully. James was handsome, successful, and completely unaware that his company was on the brink of collapse, or that I had spent the last 6 months secretly working to save it. "Everything's fine, Mother," he replied, but I could see the tension in his jaw. James was a brilliant engineer, but he'd never had his father's head for business. The company had been bleeding money for years, and he'd been too proud to admit it. Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Of course it is, Matthew's men always succeed. She turned her attention back to me. Though I suppose that's hard for some people to understand. Not everyone grows up with business in their blood. Eleanor, my father-in-law's brother, Uncle Robert, cut in. Perhaps we could discuss something else. But Eleanor was on a roll now, fortified by several glasses of expensive wine. I'm simply saying that some people might find it difficult to appreciate the pressures of running a family company, especially when their previous experience was mainly answering phones and getting coffee. The table fell silent. I could feel everyone's discomfort. The Matthews family had never quite known how to handle Eleanor's thinly veiled disdain for her son's choice of wife. What none of them knew, what even James didn't know, was that I hadn't just been a secretary at Matthews Industries. I had been working on my MBA at night, studying the company's operations, seeing problems that everyone else seemed to miss. By the time I married James, I understood Matthews Industries better than most of its executives. And for the past 6 months, I had been secretly working to save it from bankruptcy. It started when I accidentally discovered some concerning financial reports in James's home office. The company was hemorrhaging money, losing contracts, and falling behind competitors. James was drowning, but his pride and his mother's expectations kept him from admitting it. Instead of confronting him, I began working behind the scenes. My old network from my secretary days proved invaluable: assistants and receptionists who knew everything that happened in their offices, who were happy to help the former one of them who had married the boss. Through them, I learned about a potential deal with Suntech, a rising star in the tech industry. They needed a manufacturing partner for their new line of products, and Matthews Industries had the facilities they needed. The problem was, no one at Matthews had taken their overtures seriously. Suntech was too new, too different from our traditional clients. But I saw the potential. Using my connections and working through intermediaries, I spent months nurturing the relationship, structuring a deal that would not only save Matthews Industries, but transform it for the modern era. This morning, I had finally closed the deal, $50 million upfront, with the potential for billions in ongoing contracts. Tomorrow at the board meeting, when Suntech's CEO announced the partnership, everything would change. Sarah? James's voice pulled me back to the present. You're very quiet tonight. I smiled at my husband, reaching for his hand under the table. Just thinking about tomorrow's board meeting. Eleanor's eyebrows rose. Oh, do you attend those now? How progressive of you, James. Sarah's insight is valuable, James defended, though I could hear the slight uncertainty in his voice. Even after 5 years, his mother's disapproval could still shake his confidence. I'm sure it is, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with condescension. Tell me, Sarah, what insights could you possibly offer about running a company that's been in our family for 3 generations? I met her gaze steadily. Sometimes a fresh perspective is exactly what a company needs, Eleanor. She laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Fresh perspective? My dear, you wouldn't know the first thing about running a business of this magnitude. This isn't like organizing the office Christmas party. I felt James tense beside me, but I squeezed his hand, silently asking him to let it go. Tomorrow would bring enough drama without adding to it tonight. Perhaps you're right, I said smoothly, raising my glass. To the Matthews legacy. Eleanor smiled triumphantly, clearly taking my response as submission. As she noticed the slight curve of my lips, the quiet confidence in my eyes, she dismissed it as the wishful thinking of a social climber who had married above her station. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of subtle jabs and backhanded compliments. Eleanor held court, reminiscing about the glory days of Matthews Industries, when her husband William had turned it into one of the largest manufacturing companies in the country. Your father had such vision, she told James. He could spot an opportunity a mile away. That's the Matthews instinct, something that can't be learned in some community college course. Another pointed look in my direction. I thought about the contracts in my office, about the months of careful negotiation, about the future I had secured for the company while they were all clinging to the past. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. After dinner, as we waited for the valet to bring our car, James pulled me close. I'm sorry about Mother, he said softly. You know how she gets. It's fine, I assured him, straightening his tie. Nothing she says matters. He studied my face. You seem different lately. More confident, like you know something the rest of us don't. I smiled, thinking of the board meeting tomorrow. Maybe I do. Cared to share? All in good time, I said, kissing him lightly. Just promise me you'll be at the board meeting tomorrow. Don't let anything keep you away. He looked puzzled but nodded. Of course. Though I don't know why it's so important, it's just another quarterly review. If he noticed my slight smile, he didn't mention it. That night, as James slept beside me, I stayed awake, reviewing the events that had led to this moment. I thought about my first day at Matthews Industries, a fresh-faced secretary with an MBA dream. How Eleanor had walked past my desk every morning without so much as a glance in my direction. How James had been different, actually seeing me, appreciating my insights, falling in love with me despite his mother's opposition. I thought about the day I discovered how bad things really were at the company. The shock of seeing the true financial statements, the realization that the company's proud legacy was about to come crashing down. The decision to act, to save not just the company but my husband from the weight of failure. Tomorrow would change everything. The question was, would they be ready for it? My phone buzzed softly, a text from Angela, Suntech's CEO. Everything set for tomorrow. Can't wait to see their faces. I smiled in the darkness. Angela had become more than just a business partner over the months of negotiation. She understood what it was like to be underestimated, to have to prove yourself in a world that had already decided what you were worth. Get ready for a show, I texted back. The Matthews Industries boardroom was impressive by design. 40 stories up, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was meant to intimidate. The massive mahogany table, the leather chairs, the portraits of past CEOs lining the walls. Everything screamed old money, established power. I arrived early, watching the morning sun paint the city gold. The contracts were safely stored in my briefcase, along with a presentation that would change everything. James had already left for his usual morning meetings, completely unaware of what was coming. Eleanor arrived exactly 10 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin, wearing her trademark channel suit and an expression of barely concealed disdain when she saw me. Sarah, don't tell me you're actually staying for the board meeting. She made it sound like I was planning to crash a private club. Of course, I replied calmly. I wouldn't miss it. She sighed dramatically. Really, James needs to set better boundaries. These meetings are for actual board members and executives, not— She waved her hand dismissively, family observers. Before I could respond, the other board members began filing in. I recognized them all. The old guard who had run Matthews Industries with William, who still saw me as the secretary who had somehow snared the boss's son. James arrived last, looking slightly harried. Sorry, got caught up in the R&D meeting. What's on the agenda for today? Theodore Wells, the CFO, cleared his throat. Actually, we have some concerning matters to discuss regarding the company's financial position. Before we get to that, I interrupted smoothly, standing up. There's something else that needs to be addressed. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Sarah, dear, this really isn't the time for whatever this is. Actually, Eleanor, this is exactly the time. I moved to the front of the room, pulling out my laptop and connecting it to the display screen. You see, I've been working on something for the past 6 months. Something that's going to change everything for Matthews Industries. The room fell silent as I pulled up the first slide. Charts showing the company's declining revenues, lost contracts, mounting debts, everything they have been trying to hide. What is this? James asked, his voice tight. Sarah, how did you get these numbers? I finished for him. I've always had access to them, James. I've been watching our company slowly die while everyone in this room pretended everything was fine. Eleanor stood up, her face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. You had no right to access these documents. James, are you going to let your wife? Mother. James cut in, staring at the screen. These numbers, are they accurate? Theodore shifted uncomfortably. Yes, we've been trying to find a way to tell you. The situation is quite serious. I clicked to the next slide. 6 months ago, I started working on a solution. Something that would not only save Matthews Industries but transform it for the future. The boardroom door opened and Angela Chen walked in, followed by her executive team. Eleanor's mouth fell open as she recognized the CEO of Suntech. Ms. Chen? James stood up, confused. I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled. That's because the meeting wasn't with you, James, Angela said, smiling at me. It was with Sarah. I pulled out the contracts from my briefcase. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that Matthews Industries has just entered into a historic partnership with Suntech, a $50 million immediate investment with projected contracts worth billions over the next decade. The room erupted in chaos, board members talking over each other, James staring at me in shock, Eleanor looking like she might faint. "This is impossible," Eleanor finally managed. You're just a secretary. You couldn't possibly." "Actually," Angela interrupted, "Sarah has proven to be one of the most brilliant strategists I've ever worked with. She saw the potential for this partnership months ago, when everyone else was too caught up in the past to see the future. I distributed copies of the contracts. The deal is already signed. Suntech gets the manufacturing capability they need, and Matthews Industries gets the innovation and capital it desperately needs. A perfect partnership." James was reading through the contract, his expression a mix of amazement and something else. Pride, maybe. "Sarah, this is incredible. But why didn't you tell me?" I moved to stand beside him. "Because you needed to be protected. If the deal hadn't worked out, if I had failed, no one would have known how close we came to losing everything. Your reputation would have been safe." "Protected?" Eleanor scoffed, though her voice wavered. "You went behind everyone's back, made decisions about our family company." "I saved our family company," I corrected her firmly. "While you were also busy protecting the Mackeys' legacy, you nearly destroyed it. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see what the insiders are too close to notice." The board members were murmuring amongst themselves, reviewing the contracts with growing excitement. The terms were excellent. I had negotiated from a position of knowledge rather than desperation, creating a deal that would benefit both companies. Angela stepped forward. "I'd like to make another announcement. Given Sarah's extraordinary work on this deal and her clear vision for the future, Suntech would like to recommend her for a position on the Matthews Industries board." Eleanor made a choking sound. "This is absurd. She's not qualified." "Actually," Theodore interrupted, looking up from the contracts, "looking at what she's accomplished here, I'd say she's more than qualified. This deal, it's brilliant. It saves us from bankruptcy while positioning us for growth we haven't seen in decades." James stood up, taking my hand. "I second the nomination. My wife has proven she understands this company better than any of us." One by one, the board members voiced their agreement. Eleanor sat there, her face pale, as her carefully maintained world order crumbled around her. "Well," I said, squeezing James's hand, "I believe we should vote on it." "All in favor?" Every hand in the room went up, except Eleanor's. She stared at me, finally seeing me clearly for the first time. "How?" she whispered. "All this time." "Because you never bothered to look past what you thought you saw," I replied. "You were so convinced I was just a secretary who got lucky that you never noticed I was actually a businesswoman who got smart." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of discussions about integration plans and future strategies. I watched as the old guard of Matthews Industries finally began to understand that their world had changed, and that I had been the one to change it. After the meeting, James pulled me into his office. "Why didn't you tell me how bad things were? That the company was nearly bankrupt?" I touched his face gently, "Because I knew you were doing your best. You're brilliant with the technical side, James, but sometimes love means protecting the people we care about while we fix what's broken." He laughed softly. "Protect me?" "Sarah, you saved everything. The company, our future, my family's legacy. You're extraordinary. Does this mean you're not angry I kept it from you?" He pulled me close. "Angry? I'm in awe of you, and a little bit terrified, if I'm honest." Later that evening, as we were leaving the office, we ran into Eleanor in the lobby. She looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than she had at dinner the night before. "Sarah," she said, her voice unusually hesitant. I owe you an apology, many apologies actually." I studied her face, seeing the genuine struggle there. "You never gave me a chance, Eleanor. You decided who I was the moment you saw me at that desk." "Yes," she admitted. "I was wrong. So wrong. What you did today, you didn't just save the company. You protected my son, our family name. You did everything I accuse you of being incapable of doing. The question is," I said quietly, "what happens now?" She straightened her shoulders, and for a moment I saw the proud Matthews matriarch again. But then she surprised me by smiling, a real smile, not her usual social mask. "Now? Now I hope you'll give me the chance to get to know my daughter-in-law. The real one, not the one I imagined. James squeezed my hand. Dinner next week, Mother. Maybe at our house this time. Eleanor nodded. I'd like that. And Sarah, thank you for seeing what needed to be done and having the courage to do it. As we walked to our car, James looked at me with a mix of love and admiration. You know, for someone who claims she married into the Matthews family, he might be the best Matthews of us all. I thought about everything that had led to this moment, the years of dismissal and doubt, the months of secret work, the triumph of today's reveal. But most importantly, I thought about the future we could now build together. I didn't marry into the Matthews family, I said, smiling at my husband. I married you. Everything else was just business. He laughed, pulling me close. Remind me never to play poker with you. As we drove home, my phone buzzed with a message from Angela. Dinner next week. We should discuss phase 2 of the expansion plan. I smiled, thinking of all the possibilities ahead. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's showing people exactly who you are, and watching them realize how wrong they've been all along. The text came at 3 a.m. Sarah, I messed up. Really bad. Need to talk ASAP. I stared at my phone, already knowing what my brother had done. The crypto market had crashed overnight, wiping out billions in digital assets. And knowing Mike, he hadn't just lost his own money, he'd lost our parents' entire retirement fund. My name is Sarah Anderson, and at 32, I was about to deal with the fallout of my younger brother's biggest mistake yet. The next morning, Mike showed up at my apartment looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfectly styled hair was a mess, and his designer clothes were wrinkled, a far cry from the cocky crypto millionaire he proclaimed himself to be at Thanksgiving. How bad? I asked, letting him in. He collapsed onto my couch, running his hands through his hair. Everything. The whole investment, gone. $2.4 million, just vanished. I sat down slowly, the magnitude of what he'd done sinking in. Mom and Dad's entire retirement fund. He nodded miserably. The market crashed. The exchange went bankrupt. But there's still a chance, if we can access the private wallet where I transferred some of the coins. Some? I interrupted. How much? About half. But I lost the recovery phrase, and without it, he trailed off, looking at me hopefully. You're good with this tech stuff, right? Maybe you could help me figure out how to get it back. I almost laughed. Mike had always dismissed my work in cybersecurity as boring tech stuff, preferring to trust cryptocurrency influencers and get-rich-quick schemes. Now he wanted my help. Let me get this straight, I said, keeping my voice level. You took our parents' retirement savings, money they spent 40 years building, and put it into crypto without their knowledge. I was trying to help them, he protested. Their traditional investments were too slow. Crypto was supposed to multiply their money. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, needing a moment to control my anger. Through the window, I could see the small cafe where Mom and Dad used to take us for Sunday brunch. They'd worked their whole lives to build that retirement fund. Dad as a high school teacher, Mom as a nurse. 40 years of careful saving, gone because my brother thought he knew better. They don't know yet, do they? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mike shook his head. I was waiting for the market to recover. It always recovers, right? Not this time, I said, turning back to face him. The exchange you used is bankrupt, Mike. It's over. He jumped up, pacing my small living room. But the private wallet? If we can just recover those coins. I watched him, an idea forming in my mind. 2 weeks ago, when I first suspected Mike was in over his head, I'd done some digging. I found his wallet addresses, traced his transactions, and yes, I found the recovery phrase he thought he'd lost. But Mike didn't need to know that. Not yet. What exactly did you do with the recovery phrase? I asked. I wrote it down. I know I did. It was on a piece of paper in my apartment, but I can't find it anywhere. He ran his hands through his hair again, making it stand up even more. Sarah, please, you have to help me fix this. I thought about our parents, how Dad had put off retiring for 5 extra years to build their nest egg, how Mom still picked up extra shifts at the hospital even though her arthritis made it painful to stand for long periods. Okay, I said finally. I'll help. But we do this my way. Mike's face lit up. Really? You can recover the wallet? Maybe. But first, you need to tell Mom and Dad the truth. His expression fell. I can't? It'll kill them. They need to know, Mike, and it needs to come from you. He sank back onto the couch, looking smaller somehow. Will you come with me? I nodded, already planning the next steps in my head. We'll go tonight, but remember, this is just the beginning. If you want my help recovering those coins, you're going to have to do exactly what I say. That evening, we drove to our parents' house in silence. The modest two-story home where we'd grown up looked exactly the same. Mom's flower garden blooming despite the early spring chill, Dad's old Volvo in the driveway. Mike's hands were shaking as we walked up to the door. I could have told him then that I had the recovery phrase, that half their money might still be recoverable. But he needed to face this moment, needed to see exactly what his reckless actions had done to the people who trusted him. Mom answered the door, her face lighting up when she saw us. What a surprise. Come in, come in. I just made coffee. Dad was in his usual spot in the living room, grading papers at his desk. Even after retiring, he still substituted at the high school a few days a week. To stay sharp, he said, though we knew it was also to help build their savings. Their savings. The thought made my stomach turn. Mom, Dad. Mike started, his voice cracking. I need to tell you something. They sat together on the couch, concern growing on their faces as Mike struggled to find the words. Finally, I stepped in. Mike made some investment decisions, I said gently, with your retirement fund. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. What do you mean? Mike couldn't meet their eyes as he explained. How he'd convinced their financial advisor to transfer the money, how he'd invested it all in cryptocurrency, how it had seemed like a sure thing until it wasn't. The silence that followed his confession was deafening. All of it? Dad finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Everything we saved. Mike nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry. I thought I could make it grow faster, give you the retirement you deserved. Mom's face had gone pale. But how will we? She couldn't finish the sentence. I watched as the reality of what Mike had done sank in. All their plans. The small condo in Florida they'd been looking at, the trip to Europe they'd been saving for, the comfortable retirement they'd worked so hard to build, gone because my brother thought he knew better than 40 years of careful planning. There might be a way to recover some of it, I said carefully. About half the money was transferred to a private wallet. If we can access that wallet, those funds might still be there. Hope flickered across their faces, but I could see the trust was already broken. Mike had always been their golden child, the charming son who could talk his way out of anything. But not this time. I trusted you, Dad said, his voice heavy with disappointment. We trusted you. Mike broke down completely then, sobbing like I hadn't seen since we were kids. I'll fix this, he promised between tears. I'll work 3 jobs if I have to. I'll pay back every penny. But we all knew that was impossible. Even if he worked for the next 20 years, he couldn't replace what they'd lost. As we drove back to my place later that night, Mike was quiet, the weight of what he'd done finally sinking in. What do we do now? He asked as I parked outside my building. I thought about the recovery phrase stored safely in my encrypted files, about the plan I'd been forming since I first discovered what he'd done. Now, I said, you learn what it means to be responsible for your actions. If you want my help recovering those coins, you're going to have to earn it. How? First, you're going to sell your fancy car, your designer clothes, everything you bought with Mom and Dad's money. Every penny goes to them. He nodded quickly. Of course, anything. Second, you're going to move back home and help them. Dad shouldn't be working at his age, and Mom's arthritis is getting worse. They need support, not someone gambling with their future. Okay, he agreed, though I could see him struggling with the idea of giving up his downtown apartment and luxury lifestyle. And third, I continued, you're going to learn exactly how cryptocurrency works, not from influencers and Reddit posts, but from actual experts. I've arranged for you to take some courses at the Tech Institute where I teach part-time. He looked at me in surprise. You teach 2 nights a week, cybersecurity and blockchain technology. Maybe if you paid attention to what I do for a living instead of dismissing it as boring tech stuff, you wouldn't be in this mess. The jab hit home. Mike slumped in his seat, all his usual bravado gone. How long will it take? To recover the wallet? I smiled slightly. That depends on you. Show me you're serious about making things right, and we'll talk about the recovery phrase. As he got out of my car, I could see him processing everything, the magnitude of what he'd lost, the long road ahead to even begin making amends. Good. He needed to feel this to understand that actions have consequences, because what he didn't know was that this was just the beginning of his lesson. The next few weeks tested Mike in ways he'd never experienced. True to his word, he sold his Tesla, his designer wardrobe, and moved back into our parents' house. His downtown apartment went on the market, though the real estate agent warned it might take months to find a buyer in the current market. I watched from a distance as he struggled to adjust to his new reality. Every morning, he drove Dad to the high school in our old family Honda, then spent his days helping Mom around the house and applying for jobs. His crypto trading friends stopped calling once word got out about his losses. Meanwhile, I kept the recovery phrase safely encrypted, waiting to see if Mike's transformation was genuine or just another act. One evening, about a month after the confession, I stopped by our parents' house to check on things. I found Mike in the kitchen, helping Mom with dinner. He was wearing an old t-shirt and jeans, a far cry from his usual designer outfits. The hospital called. Mom said as I sat down at the counter, "They're offering me my old position back full-time." "Mom, no," Mike protested. "Your arthritis." "We need the money," she said simply. "Your father's substitute teaching salary isn't enough." I watched the guilt wash over Mike's face. This was exactly what he needed to see, the real consequences of his actions. "Actually," I said, pulling out my laptop, "I might have some news about that." They both looked at me expectantly. "I've been doing some research," I continued, opening my files. "And I think I found something interesting about the wallet where Mike transferred half the funds." Mike nearly dropped the plate he was drying. "You found the recovery phrase?" "Not exactly," I said, though the phrase was sitting in my encrypted folder. "But I found a trail. The wallet's still active, and the coins haven't been moved." Hope flickered across their faces. "How much?" Mom asked quietly. "If we can access it?" "About $1.2 million at current market rates." Mike sat down heavily. "Sarah, why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you weren't ready," I said firmly. "You needed to understand what you've done first." And speaking of understanding, I pulled out a stack of papers. "How are those blockchain technology courses going?" He actually smiled. "Better than I expected. I finally understand what a private key actually is and how wallet security works. I can't believe I was trading all that money without really knowing how any of it worked." "That's exactly why I didn't tell you about this sooner," I said. "Knowledge matters, Mike. Real knowledge, not just hype and FOMO." Mom looked between us. "So you can get the money back?" "Maybe," I said carefully, "but it's going to take time, and there are no guarantees." In the meantime, I pulled out another document. I set up a monthly transfer from my savings to help with expenses. "Sarah, no," Mom protested. "We can't take your money." "You're not taking it," I insisted. "I'm helping my family. That's what we do, right? Help each other. The right way, not by gambling with people's futures." Mike flinched at that, but nodded. "She's right, Mom. Let us help." Over the next 2 months, I watched Mike continue to change. He found a job at a local tech company. Entry level, nothing glamorous, but honest work. He attended his blockchain courses diligently, actually engaging with the material instead of just looking for get-rich-quick schemes. Most importantly, he spent time with our parents, really seeing them for the first time in years. He drove Mom to her doctor's appointments, helped Dad with house repairs they'd been putting off, and slowly began to rebuild their trust. One evening, after a family dinner, Mike pulled me aside. "I know what you're doing," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" "The recovery phrase. You've had it all along, haven't you?" I studied his face, looking for signs of his old entitled anger, but saw only tired acceptance. "What makes you think that?" He laughed softly. "Because you're you, Sarah. You've always been 10 steps ahead of everyone else. You probably found it weeks before the crash, didn't you?" I nodded slowly. "I was monitoring your transactions. I saw where you moved the funds, and I found the phrase when I was going through your backup files. Why didn't you stop me before I lost the rest?" "Would you have listened?" I asked. "Or would you have accused me of being jealous of your success, like you did when I warned you about the risks?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "You're right. I wouldn't have listened. I had to learn the hard way. And have you learned? He gestured around the kitchen, at the dishes he'd just washed, the grocery list he'd made for Mom, the budget spreadsheet on his laptop. I think I'm starting to. It's not just about the money, is it? It's about responsibility, about thinking beyond yourself. I pulled out my phone and opened my encrypted files. The recovery phrase is yours, I said, showing him the screen. But think carefully about what you do with it. There's more at stake here than just money. He stared at the string of words that could restore half of what he'd lost, but didn't immediately reach for my phone. Can we wait? He asked. I want to finish my courses first, really understand what I'm doing. And maybe we should talk to a financial advisor about the best way to handle it. I smiled, feeling proud of my little brother for perhaps the first time in years. That, I said, sounds like a very good idea. 3 months later, we sat down with our parents and a financial advisor to discuss the recovered funds. The money wouldn't fully replace what was lost, but it would ensure they could retire comfortably, if modestly. Mike insisted that the funds be placed in a conservative investment portfolio, with him having no direct access. I've learned my lesson, he said when Mom tried to protest. Some things are too important to risk. As we left the advisor's office, Mike turned to me. Thank you, he said. Not just for saving the money, but for teaching me what it really means to take care of family. I hugged him, remembering the arrogant crypto bro he'd been just months ago. That's what big sisters are for, I said. To help you learn from your mistakes. Even when the mistake is $2.4 million? Especially then. Today, our family is stronger than ever. Mom retired properly, with Dad joining her. They never did buy that condo in Florida, but they seem content with their modest lifestyle and weekly family dinners. Mike continues to work at the tech company, where he's been promoted twice. He's paying back what he can to our parents, though they insist it's unnecessary. More importantly, he's found purpose in helping others avoid the mistakes he made, volunteering to teach financial literacy at the local community center. As for me, I keep the story of the recovery phrase as a reminder that sometimes the best way to help someone isn't to save them from their mistakes, but to help them learn from them. Last week, Mike brought his new girlfriend to family dinner. When she mentioned being interested in cryptocurrency, I watched him launch into a careful explanation of blockchain technology, investment risks, and the importance of doing thorough research. The most expensive lesson I ever learned, he told her, was that there are no shortcuts to building something worthwhile. Mom squeezed my hand under the table, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters. The recovery phrase still sits in my encrypted files, a reminder of both how much we almost lost and how much we gained. But these days, its value isn't measured in cryptocurrency or dollars. It's measured in the lessons learned, the trust rebuilt, and the family bonds strengthened through crisis. As I watched Mike help Dad with the dishes later that evening, discussing responsible investment strategies and the importance of diversification, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best returns don't come from the market, they come from learning who you really are and what truly matters. The boardroom felt suffocating as I sat there, watching James pace in front of the projection screen. His expensive suit and perfectly coiffed hair screamed success, while his smirk spoke volumes about how he viewed me, the grieving widow who needed to be managed. The numbers don't lie, he said, clicking to the next slide. Since David's passing 6 months ago, our stock has dropped 15%. The market is losing confidence in quantum tech's leadership. My name is Rachel Chen, and 6 months ago, I lost my husband to a car accident. Today, I was about to lose his company too, or so my brother-in-law thought. Our shareholders are nervous, James continued, his voice dripping with fake concern. They're worried about having well, let's be honest here, a housewife controlling 51% of a major tech company. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. They'd known me for years as David's wife, the woman who hosted company parties and attended charity events on his arm. The woman who, as far as they knew, had no technical background, no business experience, no qualifications beyond being married to their brilliant CEO. If only they knew. Rachel, James turned to me, his expression a masterpiece of condescending concern. You know, David would want what's best for the company. My proposal is more than generous. We'll buy your shares at a premium. You can keep the house, the cars, maintain your lifestyle. But let those of us who understand this industry take control. I looked down at the proposal in front of me, fighting to keep my expression neutral. The generous offer would indeed keep me wealthy, but it would give James complete control of quantum tech, the company David and I had built from nothing. And if I refuse? I asked quietly. James's smile tightened. Then I'll be forced to call for a vote of no confidence. The board already supports me. They know you're not qualified to make decisions about quantum computing and AI development. I see. I closed the folder containing his proposal. And what about Project Phoenix? The room went silent. Project Phoenix was quantum tech's most closely guarded secret, a revolutionary quantum encryption system that could change the face of cybersecurity. As far as the world knew, it was David's final project, still in development. James' confidence faltered for a moment. Project Phoenix is proceeding according to schedule. Really? I raised an eyebrow. So you understand the modifications I made to the quantum entanglement algorithm last week? The ones that increased efficiency by 40%? His face went blank. Around the table, board members started whispering to each other. What modifications? James demanded. David's original design was flawed, I cut in. It couldn't scale beyond local networks. The new architecture I implemented allows for global deployment while maintaining quantum coherence. The whispers grew louder. James's face reddened. You expect us to believe you understand quantum computing? You've never even worked in tech. I smiled, thinking about the past 5 years, about the late nights working alongside David, developing algorithms, solving problems that had stumped the industry's best minds, about our decision to keep my involvement secret, knowing how the tech world would react to a female Asian developer, especially one married to the CEO. Actually, I said, standing up and walking to the computer connected to the projector, I've been working in tech for longer than you have, James. I just did it under a different name. I typed quickly, logging into a secure server. The screen filled with code, the core architecture of Project Phoenix. Do you recognize this coding style? I asked the board members. It's remarkably similar to the work of R.C. Wong, isn't it? The effect was immediate. Everyone in tech knew R.C. Wong, the mysterious developer whose innovations had driven quantum tech's success for the past 5 years. The genius who never appeared in public, never gave interviews, communicating only through code commits and technical documentation. That's impossible, James sputtered. R.C. Wong is. Me, I said simply. Rachel Chen Wong. David and I decided early on that my work would be judged more fairly if people didn't know I was his wife. So we created a persona, the reclusive genius who just happened to collaborate brilliantly with Quantum Tech's CEO. I pulled up more files, years of development logs, emails between David and me discussing technical details, video recordings of us working late in our home office. David wasn't just my husband. I continued, my voice soft but firm. He was my partner in every sense. We built this company together. The only difference is he did it publicly while I worked in the shadows. The board members were staring at their tablets, where I just sent copies of all the documentation. James looked like he'd been hit by a truck. This is a trick, he said weakly. Some sort of deception. Would you like me to explain exactly how the quantum entanglement modifications work? I offered. Or maybe you prefer to discuss the neural network architecture I designed for our AI division, the one you've been taking credit for managing these past 6 months. The next hour in the boardroom was unlike anything anyone present had ever experienced. I walked them through Project Phoenix of architecture, explaining complex quantum computing concepts with the ease of someone who had spent years immersed in the field. With each explanation, each technical detail I elaborated on, James's face grew paler. But the patents, he finally interrupted, grasping at straws. They're all in David's name. I pulled up another file. Actually, they're jointly held. David insisted on it, though I wanted to keep using the R.C. Wong persona. I smiled slightly at the memory. He said someday the world would need to know the truth. Marcus Chen, our head of development and no relation despite the shared surname, leaned forward. The quantum bridge protocol, that was you. The one that solved our coherence issues. I nodded. David was brilliant with hardware, but software was always my strength. We complemented each other perfectly. That's why he never fully explained how certain systems worked. Marcus said, realization dawning on his face. He always deflected to R.C. Wong's documentation. Because I wrote it, I confirmed. David and I had an agreement. He handled the public face of the company, the meetings, the presentations. I focused on development, on solving the technical problems that kept us ahead of the competition. James had remained unusually quiet, his eyes darting between me and his tablet. I could almost see the wheels turning in his head, trying to find a way to discredit me. Even if this is true, he finally said, running a tech company requires more than just technical knowledge. It needs business acumen, leadership skills. You mean like the skills I used to negotiate our Series C funding? I interrupted. The deal I closed with Vector Capital while using the R.C. Wong persona. More murmurs around the table. The Vector Capital deal had been legendary. A $300 million investment on incredibly favorable terms, negotiated entirely through encrypted communications with the mysterious R.C. Wong. That's right, I continued. I handled most of our major deals. The investors actually preferred dealing with R.C. Wong. They said they'd never met someone who understood both the technical and business sides so completely. I clicked to a new slide showing our company's growth over the past 5 years. Every major innovation, every significant breakthrough. They all came after R.C. Wong joined the company, after I started working with David. This is absurd, James snapped, finally losing his composure. You expect us to believe that all this time, while you were playing the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties and charity events, you were secretly some kind of tech genius. No, I said calmly. I expect you to look at the evidence in front of you and make a rational decision about what's best for this company. I turned to address the entire board. I understand your concerns about leadership, but ask yourselves this: who really knows quantum text technology? Who understands where we're going and how to get there? The person who created our core technologies or the person who's been trying to take credit for them? The board members exchanged glances. Patricia Morrison, our longest-serving member, cleared her throat. Mrs. Chen, Rachel, why reveal this now? Why not continue as R.C. Wong? I thought about David, about our late-night conversations about the future, because David was right. The world needs to know that innovation doesn't look like what they expect. That breakthrough ideas can come from anyone, regardless of their gender, their background, or whether they fit the tech industry's preconceptions. I pulled up one final document, the last email David had sent me just hours before the accident. My brilliant Rachel, if anything ever happens to me, don't let them push you into the shadows. Show them who you really are. Show them what we built together. All my love, David. I spent 5 years hiding who I am, I said quietly. I won't do it anymore. This company needs leadership that understands both its technology and its potential. I am that leader, whether you choose to accept it or not. James stood up abruptly. This is all very theatrical, but it doesn't change the fact that I have the board's support. I moved to call for an immediate vote on my proposal to purchase Rachel's shares. I smiled. Actually, James, I don't think you do have the board's support. Not anymore. Marcus Chen was already shaking his head. Not after this. Rachel, or R.C. Wong, has been the driving force behind every major advancement we've made. We'd be fools to let her go. Other board members nodded in agreement. James looked around the room, watching his carefully constructed plan crumble. This isn't over, he said, gathering his papers. I'll have my lawyers review everything. If there's even a hint of impropriety, of backdated documents or falsified records, you'll find everything in order. I cut in. David and I were very careful with our documentation. But by all means, have your lawyers look. While they do, I'll be focusing on completing Project Phoenix's global rollout, unless you'd like to explain to our shareholders why you're trying to force out the person who actually developed it. He stormed out of the boardroom, leaving a heavy silence behind. Patricia Morrison was the first to speak. I think we've all underestimated you, Rachel. Some of us for years. I thought about all the board meetings I'd sat through quietly, all the times I'd listened to James and others dismiss or minimize my husband's, our achievements. Yes, I said simply, you have. The question is, what are you going to do about it now? The weeks following my revelation were a whirlwind of change. News of R.C. Wong's true identity hit the tech world like a tsunami. The media couldn't get enough of the story. the grieving widow who turned out to be a secret tech genius, the woman who had revolutionized quantum computing while letting others take the credit. Mrs. Chen, a reporter from Tech Weekly, asked during my first public interview, "Why maintain the deception for so long? Weren't you angry about not getting credit for your work?" I sat in my office, David's old office, looking at his picture on the desk. "It was never about credit," I said. David and I knew how the tech world would react to a female Asian developer, especially one married to the CEO. We wanted our work to be judged on its merits, not clouded by prejudice or assumptions. The reporter nodded. "And your brother-in-law? Sources say he's challenging the authenticity of your work." I smiled, thinking of James' increasingly desperate attempts to discredit me. His lawyers had spent weeks combing through every line of code, every patent filing, every piece of documentation. "James is welcome to his doubts," I replied. "The code speaks for itself." What I didn't mention was the email I'd received that morning from James's lawyers, quietly withdrawing their challenges. They'd found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Every innovation, every breakthrough had been meticulously documented, jointly credited to David and me from the start. The real surprise came a week later, when I arrived at the office to find Marcus Chen waiting with an unusual request. "The development team wants you to do a code review," he said, looking slightly embarrassed. "In person. They've been working with R.C. Wong's documentation for years, but now they want to learn directly from you." I spent the afternoon in the development lab, surrounded by engineers who had once seen me only as the CEO's wife. Their respect wasn't grudging or forced. It was earned, line of code by line of code, as I walked them through the systems I'd designed. "It all makes sense now," one young developer said. "The elegant solutions, the innovative approaches, they had your signature all along. We just didn't know to look for it." That evening, as I was preparing to leave, Patricia Morrison appeared in my doorway. "The board has been discussing the future of quantum tech," she said without preamble. "We'd like to make your position as CEO permanent." I looked up from my computer, where I'd been reviewing the latest Project Phoenix tests, and James has resigned from the board, effective immediately. She smiled slightly. "His last attempt to challenge your work backfired rather spectacularly. Turns out several of his own innovations were actually based on incomplete copies of your prototypes." I wasn't surprised. James had always been better at taking credit than creating something original. "There's something else," Patricia continued. "We've had inquiries from several major tech companies about potential collaborations. It seems R.C. Wong's reputation carries even more weight now that people know the full story." I thought about David, about our dreams for quantum tech. What kinds of collaborations? Google wants to discuss quantum-enhanced machine learning. Microsoft is interested in integrating Project Phoenix into their cloud security. And SpaceX, she paused for effect, wants to talk about quantum communications for their Mars mission. I looked at David's picture again, remembering our late-night conversations about the future of technology. He had always pushed me to think bigger, to see beyond current limitations. "Schedule the meetings," I said. "But make it clear, I'll be representing quantum tech as myself." No more shadows, no more hiding. The next month was a blur of meetings, presentations, and negotiations. I spoke at tech conferences, did interviews with major publications, and began mentoring programs for young women in STEM. The story of R.C. Wong became a rallying cry for change in the tech industry. James, meanwhile, had disappeared from public view. The last I heard, he was trying to start his own tech company, but investors were wary. It turned out his reputation for taking credit for others' work had spread. 1 year to the day after my revelation in the boardroom, I stood on stage at the World Technology Summit, preparing to unveil Project Phoenix's global launch. The audience was packed with industry leaders, investors, and media. Quantum computing isn't just about processing power. I began looking out at the sea of faces. It's about seeing possibilities others miss, about having the courage to pursue solutions that seem impossible. I clicked to the first slide, a picture of David and me in our garage, where we'd built our first quantum prototype. "This is where quantum tech really began," I continued. "Not in a fancy lab or corporate office, but in a garage where two people dared to dream big. One of those people worked in the spotlight while the other stayed in the shadows. Today, we're bringing those innovations into the light." The presentation was a triumph. Project Phoenix's capabilities exceeded even the most optimistic predictions. Our stock price soared, and more importantly, we were changing the face of cybersecurity forever. After the presentation, as I was gathering my things, I found a note that had been slipped into my bag. It was from James. Rachel, I was wrong. About everything. I'm sorry. James. I folded the note and put it away. His apology meant little now, but at least he had finally seen the truth, that innovation doesn't care about gender, background, or appearances. It cares about brilliance, determination, and the courage to stand in the light. That evening, I sat in my home office, surrounded by the computers and equipment where David and I had spent so many happy hours working together. On my screen was the code for our next big project, a quantum AI system that could revolutionize medical research. You were right, David, I whispered to his picture. The world did need to know the truth. And now they do. I began to type, my fingers flying over the keyboard as new ideas flowed. But this time, I wasn't hiding behind a pseudonym or working in the shadows. I was Rachel Chen, CEO of Quantum Tech, writing code that would change the world. And I was finally completely myself.